All right, so thanks so much again for doing this. My first question to you is tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you started in the community.
Sure. Well, my name is Jenny. It's spelled Jenne, but pronounced Jenny, like Jenny with an E. And I moved to the North Shore area in 2011 when I was looking for a house that was disability accessible for my mom. She had had a stroke in 2010, and we knew that we needed to combine households so she could live with us. And so, really, what made us pick the house we chose in Bothell is that it had some of the accessibility features that we needed for her. And lived here ever since. I'm raising my three kids here. Um, my youngest was actually born at home in Bothell. Not many babies are born in Bothell because most of them are born in hospitals, and we don't have a hospital in the city limits. Um, so, yeah, I got involved in local community work through my church um, when the when the stake president, so I belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, when the stake president asked me to participate in the implementation committee for the winter shelter through Kenmore Bothell Interfaith Group. And together, I helped the committee plan and implement and run the winter shelter that was located at North Lake Lutheran in 2017, 2018. Um, and that was just such a positive experience for me that I knew I wanted to get more involved in the community. I really enjoyed taking the youth group that I was a adult leader for a youth group at my church, and we would take the kids to the shelter and provide meals to the people who were receiving shelter. Um, and they just had such a great time. They have really, I think it was really a impactful lesson for them that when the shelter got funding to be a 365 shelter, um, that we were all a little sad that we couldn't take meals to the shelter anymore. And that shelter is now located in Shoreline called the Oaks, run by Lake City Partners Ending Homelessness. And I also serve on the board of that shelter. Um, and and the organization, they also run a day center. They just opened a new shelter in Kenmore, and do outreach services for North King County cities. So that's sort of that arc was how I went from, volunteering with the unhoused in North King County to serving on the board for Lake City Partners. But kind of in between that time when there wasn't the winter shelter and I wasn't on the board, I got involved with the Planning Commission at the city of Bothell. I was really hoping through my involvement with the city of Bothell that we could address some of the housing shortage issues, the housing supply issues that make it so hard for people to be able to afford housing in our area. In an effort to, hopefully prevent homelessness and displacement. Um, and so after serving for on the Planning Commission for a year or so, there were elections happening in the city of Bothell, and I ran for city council, and won in 2021 and was sworn in beginning of 2022. So that's sort of like my involvement in the community.
So what do you do now as a commit as a council member?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that one of the values that I brought to to that work is that I wanted to help make local government more accessible for people. Um, and one of the ways that I did that is I took up a tradition that was started by Councilmember Davina Dewar, who's currently serving as our House representative in um, in Olympia. But she had a newsletter that she would send out to people and ahead of each council meeting. And so I took up that tradition and I sent out an email newsletter to people in the community the Monday before council meetings and inform people on what's going on, how they can be involved, what we're discussing, because the meetings really are the people's meetings. And participatory democracy is kind of the cornerstone of the country that we live in, and just trying to really help people feel informed, involved, engaged. And so, I prepare for my council meetings. Take meetings with local community members. I send out my newsletter and try to make, in decisions on council that are informed by best practice, that are trauma informed, that are just supportive of the um, the idea um, of building community. And it's actually really interesting that you're interviewing me on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, because I'm really inspired by his concept and his teachings around the beloved community. Um, and so when the council met to talk about council priorities and make a vision for the future, I asked the council if we could model it after Martin Luther King Jr.'s idea of the beloved community. Like, what would it take for us to, what kind of policies, what kind of city planning, what kind of activities would we need to engage in as a community to really kind of live the values that Martin Luther King Jr. taught. Um, and that was approved by the council. And if you look at our 2040 visions document, you can see that one of the values that we are working towards is building the beloved community in Bothell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point that you say that, because obviously I've seen a lot of posts on social media today, saying that how important MLK Jr. is, and especially in these really crazy times right now. But yeah, so you a moment ago you talked about your work, the importance of state and local government. How important is that now, especially, during these crazy times, when things are just so messed up right now?
Yeah, well, we might find that we are entering into a time where local determination matters more than ever. So that I know for example, there are communities within, there are populations within Bothell that are very concerned about what federal overreach might look like. And at the state level, it's really important to know that we live in a state where the leaders of our state really want to protect the civil rights, that personal, civil liberties, and personal freedoms of people that are being marginalized and attacked. Um, so I know that the trans community especially is experiencing a great deal of persecution from the Republican Party, from the federal government, and it will really be up to local leaders, state and local leaders like council members, county council as well, to not let federal to not obey in advance. That's something that Timothy Snyder talks about in his book on tyranny. To not obey in advance and to not conform our local, customs, traditions, rules, policies to a federal government that our population, our voters just absolutely disagree with. The majority of our voters are trans affirming, are LGBTQ affirming, are welcoming of immigrants, and it would be a disservice to those communities, but also to our entire community to vote against their interests.
Yeah, yeah, it's really important to have those. So like, what will you guys be doing to sort of prepare for what will happen, like, what are you guys doing in your community to sort of prepare for, relentless assault attacks on individual rights, to sort of, because you got to be there for your constituents, right? So that's yeah.
I think we actually are starting from a very strong foundation of being a welcome, inclusive community where we value and celebrate the diversity of all of the individuals within our community. I think we have like I'm not entirely sure like how to describe this, but in my understanding of things, we like, well, I'll say it this way. Mindfulness is a really important practice for me. Um, and I think that as we practice mindfulness as a community, we kind of take a look around and see who's here, who are we with, and how can we show up for them in this moment. Um, and do that at every moment kind of thing. It's basically being very present and mindful about our responsibilities to one another. And that sometimes just means showing up in community, just caring for each other, being neighborly. You know, Bothell is um, another tradition started by Councilmember Dewar, and our current mayor, Mason Thompson, when he was a council member, was the idea of we started doing street parties during the pandemic. People couldn't necessarily gather inside, but it was at the point in the pandemic where we realized that kind of outdoor public events were pretty safe and we could um, enjoy our community together outside. We started doing those street parties a couple of years ago, and they have really kind of articulated a vision to the community of like, we're all in this together, and we show up with each other and we celebrate one another, and we enjoy each other's company. Um, and I think that as we continue to build community like that, we can we can kind of keep the threats at bay because we're not letting the hate and cruelty kind of grow in people's hearts. Um, like, you know, person by person, um, there is a love for others in our community. I truly believe that. Um, and then when those threats do come, because they will, right? There will be
Mm-hmm.
like we can anticipate federal overreach. We can anticipate that there will be policies, rules, laws, perhaps that are coming after people in our state, and we can speak up against them. We have found that the council can take a position in the form of a resolution to resist, to speak up against policies that we disagree with and that would threaten our way of life, our inclusive, celebratory, kind of caring way of life here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like, to in this kind of really sort of tense moment, how are you sort of what are some of the things that you say to your constituents to say like, be prepared to fight for everything, give it your all, because it's going to be some tough battles.
I take inspiration from former Congressman John Lewis, where he said, we need people who will get in good trouble, necessary trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And, I encourage people who see a problem to speak up and to do something about it. And whether that's in the form of a march or a protest or a rally, like that is people's First Amendment rights. I encourage people to exercise those rights. But also advocating and, reaching out to local city council members and local electeds and speaking up for what people individually believe is necessary and important. So I try to be responsive to members of my community. I try to lead with compassion and listen to the pain and fear that people are expressing to me. And then, you know, looking to the different kind of layers of government to see whose jurisdiction is it, who addresses that, and how do we prevent harm coming to our community members. Um, One person who I've been really just impressed by is our local Bothell chief of police, because he has been very upfront about implementing policies and following the shield laws that exist in Bothell so that he and his officers are not helping law enforcement from out of the state come after people within our community. And that has to do with like abortion, for example, or accessing trans and gender affirming care. Um, that there are shield laws in place in the state of Washington, and communities can choose, can choose to cooperate or not when you have like kind of overreaching laws or practices happening from other states.
Hmm. My last question is, what can local activism, what can local sort of organizing do to like, um, make people's voices be heard? Like, what, how is that, um, how is that tool sort of important, especially now in today's moment? Because I was listening to, I think, a podcast the other day, and they were talking about how other nations around the world, particularly those in Hungary, in other places, they don't have they don't have a democratic rule. It's mostly like, this authoritarian like style of government. So like, how does state and local government help sort of be that last line of defense against federal overreach?
Well, you started out with your question talking about activism, and I can't understate the importance of activism. Um, Honestly, I came to city council as an activist. Um, a volunteer in our community, also as a volunteer in the community, trying to help, the unhoused community. But I also was advocating for more inclusive, participatory government. Um, and and so, both myself and our deputy mayor we were part of the same like organizing group of activists in the city of Bothell. And we ran at the same time and were elected at the same time. And the ideas that we were advocating for we have been able to implement them into policy as we've become council members. And I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to accomplish because with our colleagues as well on council. Um, for example, we were able to hire a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant who gave us basically a report on, you know, issues in every agency in the city, like every department. And then we hired a DEI coordinator who helped create a roadmap to help every agency move towards greater equity and inclusion in their policies. And that has been because a group of very committed, passionate individuals in our community were advocating for it. We also have a diversity, equity, and inclusion advisory board that is opening and is actually recruiting right now through our boards and commissions process. People are able to apply and interview with city council to be added to that advisory committee so that the community is really involved in guiding policy in our local government. Um, and that's really directly born out of the Black Lives Matter protests that were occurring in 2020.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's this idea of forming coalitions and kind of, you know, doing those kinds of things. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and it really, people coming together. Um, During the pandemic, for example, there was a motion before city council, and I was not on council at the time, that would have ended all human services grants during the pandemic. And there, the human services providers, the faith community, the Black Lives Matter protester like activists all kind of saw that proposal and thought, well, that's the worst thing you could do in a time when human service needs are greater than we've seen in a very long time, and we're in a crisis situation. And so that combination, that coalition that formed meant that we were able to very loudly speak up together across organizing groups to advocate for human services grants to be continued in that year's budget. And since then, we've been able to increase investment in human services and do some really great work um, on expanding our crisis responder agency and getting people getting people access to crisis responders who are dispatched out to the scene of crisis, as well as funding and opening up a crisis stabilization center that serves North King County cities that's located in Kirkland. So we've seen some really great like coalition work that has resulted in policy wins for people who are advocating for it.
Hmm. All right.